servant or master, Gentile or Jew, woman or man, no more, no less. As followers of Jesus, the only status that matters is that we are all children of a clever, patient, and loving creative source. A source that has ordained, through intuition or revelation, that we are here to be of service to one another. Or said another way by writer and mother Ashley Gadd, you have been appointed to steward all of it, these precious children under your care, and this art burning a hole in your heart. There is no one better suited for this job, for this holy work, for this calling than you. We have all been called to care for and to create a world that manifests blessings by being the blessed ones who bless. Let me say that again, it's a mouthful. We have been called to care for and create a world that manifests blessings. Recognizing that the breath of life that animates each of us is the original blessing from our Creator. And as today's call to worship reminded us, from the dust of the earth, the Holy One breathed us into life. Through the breath of the Holy Spirit, we are all connected, setting us upon a path in search of our divinity. The one we called God formed us with a purpose to create, to serve, to tend, to protect, to love, to wash each other's feet so that life may flourish in all its forms. We are all dreamers, we are all seekers, and we are all blessed. So I'm still processing, recalling, and even rejoicing over my recent trip to South Africa with Nancy, Steve, Linda McGowan, and the others in the group. I sometimes jokingly likened us to Frodo and the Hobbits as we traipsed around Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Cape Town, with me frequently pulling up the rear. The difference between them and us, however, was that instead of a search for a ring, our mission was to see what we could bring to distant relatives. And I think we were able to do that, and because we were, I feel truly blessed. As I mentioned last week, I knew I wanted to go to South Africa, but what I didn't realize was that I needed to go there. Somehow, despite reservations because of my twice delayed knee surgery and concern about whether I would be able to navigate a rigorous trip, the universe conspired to make it happen. And that was the first blessing. The second blessing, being perhaps the most significant, was my magnificent traveling companions, half of whom I knew, and the other half that I will never forget. Everyone was extremely kind and considerate in making sure that I had assistance where needed, including getting me a wheelchair to get through a couple of airports, and especially during our visit to Robben Island, the maximum security prison where Nelson Mandela was held. While touring the prison, I tripped over a door sill and took a little spill. A couple of other people, including Nancy, tripped also, but I landed on the floor. Nico de Klerk, who some of you know, decided to get me a wheelchair for the rest of the tour. Now, the last part of the tour involved going down a ramp that was not wheelchair friendly, so I decided to skip it. In the meantime, Nico and I stayed behind, expecting the group to rejoin us because we thought they had to pass us to exit the building. That didn't happen. While Nico and I were having a thoughtful conversation about humanity, our guide came running towards us, informing us that everyone was leaving. They had exited through a different door and had gone to the dock to get the boat back to the mainland. Now, I didn't realize that the last leg of the trip, and no pun intended, was to see Mandela's actual cell. Our guide, who happened to be a former political prisoner there himself, insisted that we go to the cell and take some pictures, and I'm glad we did. However, because we did, when we returned to the dock, we saw the boat pulling away and thought for sure we'd be stuck there for quite some time. Then, to our amazement, an ambulance pulled up to where we were to retrieve Nico and I, with the driver insisting that they were not going to leave us. Sure enough, we were driven back to the dock where the boat had been moored, and it turned around and got us. I'm never going to forget Robben Island. Nancy then informed us that our rescue was the result of us knowing some influential people. Another blessing. On our trip, we saw and did a lot of amazing things. We visited museums, schools, halfway houses, townships, churches, Mandela's homes, from the townships that he lived in as a kid to the Tony community he lived in at the end of his life. We spent 2 days at a safari park, saw penguins, went to the Cape of Good Horn, the southernmost tip of West South Africa, where the Indian and Atlantic Oceans come together. We saw baboons lounging on the side of the road. We ate great food in modest classrooms, bougie restaurants, and stunning wineries. Despite all that, the thing that will remain with me the most is the feeling of the trip. The feeling that comes from the people we met and engaged with while we were there. And that is what I'd like to briefly reflect on. First, after having flown some 8,000 miles to a foreign country, I never felt like a foreigner, despite the fact that my accent gave me away to every native South African. Our initial hosts in Pretoria, Marlise and Milan, could not have been more gracious or accommodating. We had wonderful conversations, including some difficult ones around the history of their country and the relatively recent trauma they are still dealing with because of apartheid. Milan's commitment to making the world a better place and Marlise's sense that her partnership with ASAP has given her life special meaning and purpose were palpable and will stay with me. Now that I have washed your feet, you should also wash another's feet. I'm thrilled that you're so happy, I said to the first of two Nelsons from Nico's Be a Nelson program, to which Nancy quickly replied, I'm thrilled that you're so thrilled. Catching the fever, Steve Schnurr said to Nancy, and I'm thrilled that you're thrilled that he's thrilled. All of this was followed by raucous laughter. It was indeed thrilling to observe the reactions of the first two Nelsons who we were able to give laptops. That was the beginning of the week, and it just got better after that. Over the next few days, we traveled between Pretoria and Johannesburg, visiting the preschools where our hearts were just melted by students and staff alike. The children were just lovable in every conceivable way, and the staff's dedication to the students and their appreciation for the toy libraries and training they received from ASAP and Penn was just as heartwarming. Now that I have washed your feet, you should also wash another's feet. Then there were the residents of Soweto, the famed large township in the suburbs of Johannesburg. Townships are ghettos for non-whites, but their lack of basic resources and infrastructure pale in comparison to American ghettos. Communal running water is a luxury. Forget about having running water in your own residence. Folk in the townships make the most of what they have and seem to survive on love and fun despite the lack of many material amenities. I will never forget the smiles and graciousness of the families that allowed us to briefly visit with them. Living in a country with the type of natural resources that South Africa has, the residents of the townships deserve better than what they're getting. Gail Johnson, HIV/AIDS activist, author, and founder of Ncosi's Haven, is a blessing to HIV-positive mothers with kids who have no place else to go. She and her talented adopted son, Tabo, wined and dined us as we toured their compound and learned about the life-affirming work that they do. Though she struggles with funding and is frustrated that young girls continue to make the work she does necessary, she still does what she can to provide a bright future for the children and their mothers. One of my biggest thrills was being entertained by some of the teenagers who live at Ncosi's Haven. They sang some doo-wop songs for us, and they also managed to get Bill Sheehy, one of the guys who traveled with us, to show some of his fancy footwork while they were singing. It was really funny. Now that I have washed your feet, you should also wash another's feet. Our trip included meeting several high-ranking, credentialed, influential, and obviously privileged people who are all extremely welcoming, gracious, and progressive. They were all impressive. However, just as impressive were the people who served us in various capacities, from the airport personnel, our guest house and hotel workers, and especially our drivers, Michael and Ricardo, who became like family. Both of these men grew up in townships with limited material possessions. Even now, they spend significant time away from their families because they're on the road so that they can provide for them. Both men value and understand the importance of a good education. I was deeply moved with how each of them are trying to educate their children and their communities. Two of my best memories will be meeting our first driver, Michael's son. His dad would love it if he could attend school here in America. Kevin Dean, who helped Nancy plan the trip and who's a retired professor from Westchester University, is helping Michael's son map out his future education plans. Ricardo, our second driver during our last week in Cape Town, was also an amazing guy. I had several conversations with him about his son, who is an aspiring musician. And it's really hard for me to talk about him without wanting to tear up, or without tearing up, really. He pointed out that our group was not his typical group of tourists. He was so inspired by ASAP and Bia Nelson that he's starting a boot camp in his community that will essentially be a mentoring program for the kids there. Now that I have washed your feet, you should also wash another's feet. This trip was extraordinary to me on so many levels. South Africa's history is just as abhorrent, if not more so, than ours, because it is so recent. But our histories are not the final word. I'm going to wrap this up with a message from my favorite South African, who, before we returned, penned the following, which he entitled, "My Favorite Americans." And it essentially summarizes our trip. So, my favorite Americans, who are also now my favorite traveling companions, are Bob Hunter, Yvette Taylor, Nancy Hesh, Nancy Shangola, Nancy Sheehy, Bill Sheehy, Linda McGowan, Kevin Dean, and Steve Schnur. And this message was also addressed to me. My favorite Americans. With one go, we rocked the college. And that was the college that we visited, Huguenot College, where he has a lot of supporters and help. Swept the cellars, Those are the wine cellars. We went to two magnificent wineries. Got overwhelmed by Nelsons, allowing them new heights. Even our bus driver got inspired, working on a youth development plan. Started a fire in Langa with a brand new stove, whereafter breaking bread in a very old church, and that was the first Dutch Reformed church in South Africa. We cleaned the mountain's cloth. Table Mountain is the mountain that is in the city of Cape Town. It's the background to Cape Town, and it has a flat top. That's why they call it Cable Mountain. We cleaned the mountain's cloth, facilitated a legend's return when Yassine guided us to 46664. Yassine was a guide. He was actually our special guide when we toured Robben Island. And I think he had been retired formerly, Nancy. So he guided us to 46664, which was Nelson Mandela's number when he was a prisoner. We witnessed the first-time boat return for Robben Island's forgotten prisoners, Bill Bloom, who arrived as Frank Sinatra, but with Nico, forgot the Great Escape due to a conversation about humanity. Then we headed south until the end, Cape of Good Horn, the southern tip of Africa, same as Finisterre, which means end of the world. Could also be the meaning for 42 sites for removal in District 6. District 6 was a section, an area, a community in Cape Town where non-whites were forced out of their homes to make room for white people, and they were given little time to do so. And in the process, after they were forced out, their homes were demolished. The beauty of South Africa to be found not only in people and nature, but how to overcome. When you arrive at Newark, do know you left behind one inspired South African, energized to the soul, experienced your culture not to be taken for granted. This made him compose a song, "Whenever you meet an American, just be good to all of them." And he ends with these words from Mary Oliver. Have you ever tried to enter the long black branches of other lives? Try to imagine what the crisp fringes, full of honey, hanging from the branches of the young locust trees in early summer feel like. Who can open the door who does not reach for the latch? Who can travel the miles who does not put one foot in front of the other, all attentive to what presents itself continually? Who will behold the inner chamber who has not observed with admiration, even with rapture, the outer stone? Well, there's time left, fields everywhere invite you into them. There is time left, fields everywhere invite you into them. Now that I have washed your feet, you should also wash another's feet.